What's up, everybody? It's Michaela Z at your Moon Mom, and I'm here to wish you all a happy holidays and happy new year. We are about to roll into 2024, but first, we must talk about what a big year it has been for the conversation of EMF in 2023. So many new people have started to question the effects of EMFs. A lot of prominent voices have discussed publicly their concerns about EMF. We've seen a lot of celebrities just kind of quietly using their EMF protection, like Kim Kardashian. And we've also seen a lot of parents protesting 5G towers and where they're being placed. At the same time, we're seeing all of this new research come out. We're seeing bills being kind of slipped in and telecommunication companies doing some shady stuff. So we're going to do a little recap of what has happened in the world of EMF in 2023, including the things that I have personally learned this year that may have happened years ago, but is just coming to light for me. I have learned so much about EMF and the effects that it's having on our bodies and our children that I want to talk a little bit about today. So first, let's talk about the prominent voices that we've heard discuss EMF publicly, right? That's the big deal, publicly. So we saw Tim Ferriss and Andrew Huberman talking about EMF. They both were really discussing the same topic, which was the research that is indicating that EMFs have a negative impact on sperm quality. So they were recommending that you don't keep your phone in your pocket while it's on so often, and that you do some things to mitigate the risks of EMF. We also saw on the number one podcast in the world, Joe Rogan and RFK Jr. talking about EMF for a pretty long time. RFK was talking about how he has seen so much research indicating that EMFs are piercing the blood-brain barrier. He was also talking about cancer. They're seeing a lot of cancer in the ear. And one thing that really sent me down a rabbit hole was his discussion about his lawsuit with the FCC. So he is part of the Children's Health Defense, and they sued the FCC because the FCC's regulations around cell towers and where they can be placed, they're 25 years old, you guys. 25 years old. You know how much has happened in the world of technology in the last 20 years, 25 years even? Like, there has been so much advancement in technology, so many new towers placed, so many new smart devices, all of the things. And we have yet to reevaluate the regulations and the laws that are in place on the deployment of these new technologies and, you know, the effect that it's having as they're all working in unison together. So that leads me to a study that happened in Beijing, which I thought was so interesting this year. So Beijing did a study to measure EMF exposure in high density areas. And they actually found that in areas that were super high density, they had a lot of EMF exposure that was over their current regulations. So they were talking about maybe placing some different regulations around high population areas and like what kind of cell towers can be placed. New York also did something very similar to this. They decided that they were not going to allow certain 5G towers in populations where there's over 1 million or more. I'm guessing because the more people that there are using the tower, obviously the more EMF exposure you're going to have because it's going to be pulling more. So there was also a really big EMF forum that happened in Brussels towards the end of this year. And some big topics that they discussed was plans to update the European Union recommendation per public EMF exposure limits. So I'm not sure if that means that they want to make the limits higher because we are obviously being exposed to more EMF now in our technological world, or if they're looking at lowering them and then placing more regulations. Another thing that was discussed at that forum is that there's a new World Health Organization assessment that's being done on the risks of radio waves, and it's supposed to be released in 2024, and they're wanting to utilize that study to help implement the proper regulations and in modernizing EMF rules amongst countries. What direction will that take? We're not sure, right? What is this World Health Organization study going to say? I'm curious. I'm very curious about that. So an interesting thing that happened is that a couple days before this forum occurred, I think the forum happened late September and I don't think the 26th or something like that. I'll post the date. But right before that, I think it was like the 22nd or 23rd, the Senate unanimously passed the John Kennedy Spectrum Authority Licensing Enforcement Act. And that's to basically just to expand 5G. So in towns and areas that do not have access to 5G right now, they want to just go ahead and expand that before any of this research comes in. Another bill that I think is really important to talk about, and please go, participate in this if this is something that is, important to you. It's called the American Broadband Deployment Act of 2023. It's still waiting to be passed, and many people are trying to stop this bill from being passed. So you actually can go to the link in the bio and learn more about this and find where you can sign a petition if you do not want this bill to pass. So their tagline for this bill is streamline federal, state, and local permitting and regulatory reviews to expedite the deployment of communication facilities and for other purposes. It says that. What does for other purposes mean exactly? And for other purposes. So what does this mean at the core? When you get into this bill, it's basically wanting to fast track the deployment of wireless communication towers and facilities, right? And what it is meant to do is basically to bypass all city and state local regulations that are put in place to safeguard citizens. And so they will be allowed to just put cell towers up overnight and give no warning to anyone. So you can imagine just sending your kid to school one day and then there's just a cell tower on the playground. No one got any warning. No one got a letter about it. It's just there. Actually, this has happened already. There have been many incidents this year where parents have gathered together and rallied together to stop cell towers from going up near or around schools or to get them taken down that were put up without permission from the parents. This happened. I know it happened in Williamson County because I used to live there. 730 people in the area have signed a petition for the tower to be removed from an elementary school there. And that's still going on right now. So they're still petitioning this. There was also an incident a lot of people know about at the Wyandotte Elementary School, and the parents won that dispute, and the judge actually put a restraining order on that tower, and it cannot be used. It's a T-Mobile tower, and it cannot be used until further notice. So what will happen with that? It's still continuing, but as of now, the parents consider it a win, that it's been paused, that they're not allowed to turn it on. I've seen pictures of that tower. It is literally on top of the playground. It's wild. Okay, so this is breaking news, you guys, because this study actually came out this month, but there's a new study that suggests that EMF exposure, even at levels below the current safety limits, can significantly enhance the genotoxic action of gamma radiation. So basically what this study is saying is, hey, our constant exposure to these cell towers, Wi-Fi, smart devices is actually making our reaction to any kind of significant radiation worse. So like when we go get x-rays and things like that, because we're having such constant exposure all the time, when we're getting those really significant punches of radiation, we're having a more negative effect than we would otherwise. So I actually learned a lot about EMFs this year, just through conversation, through diving into research that I hadn't seen before, and just my own curiosity and conversation with people. But one thing that I really started to understand this year was the difference between a coherent and incoherent wave, and why these waves coming from man-made devices are so significantly different than say a wave that our body naturally emits. Because I think that is such a big argument in the conversation of EMFs. When you're trying to talk about, could, EMFs be negative? Could they be harmful? Most people just write it off with, oh, well, everything has EMF. Everything has some level of radiation. So why are we worried about that? The EMFs that are being emitted from things like 5G towers are billions of times different than our natural body, like the natural frequency that our body emits when we're in like a resting stage. So a really big thing that I kind of picked up on this year was like, oh, our body's never getting into a natural resting stage because we're constantly being bombarded with outside communications that are so different than what our natural body frequency is, which leads me to my conversation with Dr. Rusty, who's a neurologist that specializes in childhood brain development, and he's an expert in EMF. And he was talking about how we are electrical beings. That is what we are. We rely on electrical currents to communicate, to turn genes on, to turn genes off, to send things to the brain, to send things out of the brain. And when we are being bombarded with these communications that are frequencies, but they are so widely different than what we are used to on a daily basis, then we are constantly confused. Like our body is constantly fighting that communication because it's receiving that as a threat. And that threat that's hitting us all the time is breaking through barriers. It's breaking through our blood-brain barrier. It's breaking through our voltage-gated calcium channels, which is allowing calcium to flow into our cells. So really what EMFs are is they're like that, like that barricade breaker. Like, how the first men come in at war and they hit the gate in the old time movies until the gate opens. That is what EMFs are doing. They are opening those gates that are allowing poisons and toxins that we are being exposed to on a daily basis into places that they shouldn't be, which in the end is causing a lot of different health effects. That's why you see in the symptoms of, hypersensitivity, EMF hypersensitivity, you see so many symptoms because it's dependent on where you are and your environmental toxins and the symptoms that you're going to experience. But most people experience brain fog, headaches, migraines, sleeplessness, things like that. We've even seen the World Health Organization acknowledge depression and anxiety as a symptom of hypersensitivity to EMFs. Some other things that I learned is how much more vulnerable our children are. I was aware of EMFs around my children, but now I am much more aware of having some kind of protection near them, around them, while they're using any kind of technological device. I have not prevailed in my attempt to keep technology away from my children. I think it's important for them to know how to use these things as we kind of grow up in this world, and to limit, we try to limit it as much as possible and not have it in their face all the time, but it is around, and I'm using my phone, I'm using my computer, I work from home. It's a blessing that I get to do that, and I love technology for that. And at the same time, it's my duty as a parent, until our government figures this out and implements really good, strong regulations like we've seen in other countries. It's another thing I learned this year is that, France and Russia, I think even Switzerland now, there's many countries that are implementing pretty strict regulations around Wi-Fi in nursery schools and schools with small children, limiting Wi-Fi for kids with small children, and really paying attention because there's so much research indicating that children's brains are still developing, their tissues are much more absorbent, and they're much more at risk of long-term damage from EMF exposure than adults are with fully developed brains. I mean, we're still at risk, we're still being affected, but children are going to see the most significant impact. And right now, there's no child, in the US that's not being exposed to EMFs on a daily basis. Even just living in a city, you're walking around the city, there are 5G towers everywhere. So, I really do feel right now it's up to us as parents to put some things in place to help protect our children as we're figuring this out as a country, as we're deploying this new technology, figuring out how we're going to protect everyone in the process. Another really important thing that I learned this year is how easy it is to manipulate a study, you guys. This is why peer-reviewed studies are so important, because if you are just publishing a study, depending on what the results are that you're specifically looking for, almost every study can be manipulated to get the results that you want and to be able to say whatever it is that you want to say about that topic. So you have people who are coming out with these new technologies that are, supposedly supposed to help with EMF exposure, and they're doing studies to try to prove that their product works and that EMFs are harmful. And then you have telecommunication companies who are paying to have studies done to prove that EMFs are not harmful or it's inconclusive or whatever. So what I love so much about Aries Tech in general, which is the products that I use, is that they started with the research. So their research was military funded decades ago, before the first iPhone ever came out. They needed help with people who are working on radio signal towers to help protect them, to allow the signal to still go through, but to protect the people working on those towers from negative health effects that they were reporting having. So this family was creating technology that would help with the negative effects of radio waves years before it ever became a consumer product. The only reason it even became a consumer product is because the sun came along, iPhones started being distributed, new technology was coming out, and he was like, oh my gosh, we already have a solution for this problem. And this is one of the main reasons that I use this product, because it wasn't just a good idea like, oh, we can see that people are having concerns about EMF, so maybe we should create a product and sell it, right? It's like, oh, we've done all of the research. This is backed by research, but not just research, peer-reviewed and published research, which means other people who are not affiliated with the company, who are not affiliated with the product, have looked at this research and done their own due diligence to make sure that it was done appropriately and that it came to the appropriate conclusion. And then whenever something is published in like scientific publications, they have their own peer review happening there too. So it's like double peer-reviewed whenever it gets published in a scientific publication. Because in order to get published, you have to be peer reviewed, but you're also going to get reviewed again before you get published. So there are certain things that now I know to look for, not just in EMF protection, but in any product that I am purchasing or that I am looking for my family. If I want to know it works, I need to look for peer reviewed, published research and really understand the background of the product and the background of the company to make sure that it's super authentic and that it's legitimate, right? Overall, it's been a big year for EMFs, you guys. So many people have started asking questions about it. So many people have started integrating EMF protection into their life or just starting to do little things like unplug their Wi-Fi at night and stuff like that. I'm really hopeful and excited what's to come for 2024 as more people start expressing the concerns, as more people start being willing to having this conversation. And hopefully that leads to better regulations, especially in the US, and especially when it comes to children, schools, playgrounds, daycares, all of these areas where we have our young babies, on a daily basis. Make sure to click the link in the bio if you want to learn more about EMFs and how to protect your family. And I hope you guys have a safe, wonderful, amazing new year and a fabulous 2024. Bye, guys.